Testing, testing, testing. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Just give it a couple of minutes. It's a cold and slow moving Monday, so we'll give people a couple of minutes to get signed in and join us for the day. Get started in just a minute. For those that just joined us, we're just giving it a couple extra minutes just to let people have a slow moving Monday and give them a chance to get logged in a minute or two late. So we will get started in right just in a second. All right, we'll go ahead and get started and do some introductions while we give extra time for those who need it. Um, for those that are new here, my name is Brandy. Welcome to the ending of our Lunch and Learn series. I am the case manager and a licensed clinical social worker here at the Stephen A. Cohen Clinic at Alaska Behavioral Health. Basically, what we are is the military programs for AKBH. If you don't know about AKBH, if you're in the Alaska area, AKBH has tons of different programs from inpatient to outpatient to partial hospitalization and IOPs, and it supports the entire community. They're absolutely amazing. Our military programs here, we typically serve veterans, family members, active duty service members. Goodness. Hopefully I didn't lose you all. Sorry. Are you all still there? I'm so sorry. Sorry, I lost complete power in this office. So, um, my apologies. But anyway, we are the military branch. We serve, as I said, anyone that is impacted by the duty of a service member. If you have any questions or you need any assistance finding, connecting, whether you're military affiliated or not, need help connecting yourself or someone else to any kind of services, we're happy to do that. You will have my email that you've received this link through. Also, you'll have a follow-up email that will also include that. With us here today is one of our interns, Nick. He started out with us as a bachelor's level social work intern and has now made it all the way up to like his senior level master's internship. So we are really excited to have him here today talking about something that's near and dear to his heart. But just one other housekeeping thing. We had to cancel or kind of had to restructure for one the last few weeks ago. That was supposed to be presented called Why Knowing Me Better Doesn't Mean Doing Better. We have found a reschedule date for that, and we are looking at March 9th, same time. And I will send out an email to everyone letting you know what that link is so that you can hopefully join us for that last one. So while this is technically the scheduled last one, we have one extra to kind of throw in there as a surprise. So I'll turn it over now to Nick and we'll get kicked off.
Thank you, Brandy. I'm just getting my screen set up real quick. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Just to kind of build on that, I've been with the Cohen Clinic for the last couple of years, but before that, I was active duty in the 425 up here for 2 contracts. And so between like 2015 and 2021, I was here with the unit. And so I got out and stayed in Alaska. And as Brandy said, the transition is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. Just get my windows set up. All right, so this is about building community after military transition. It's one of those things that's kind of simple, but I think it's also really important and often gets overlooked. And so to kind of start, before we get talking about transition, we just kind of want to define community. And when I say community, I'm not talking about like people's social circles per se. I'm talking about like regular connections with people, people that share identity and purpose, people that can support each other when life gets hard, and a place where you can also contribute in some way and kind of feel purpose yourself. Um, and going into that, there's a couple terms that I want to clarify because they get mixed up a little bit. One of them is social isolation. And that term is about the amount of contact or support. It is more objective. And then loneliness, it's a feeling. And that is the feeling that you have when your connections are not meeting their standards that you've sort of set. And that's a bit more subjective. And so you can be around people and still feel lonely, and you can be alone and still feel fine. So they're not the same thing. And that's just kind of a point I wanted to make clear. And so going in, this is one of the more basic and common definitions of community: a group of people with diverse characteristics who are linked by social ties, share common perspectives, and engage in joint action in geographical locations or settings. As you can tell, that's pretty general, but that leaves a lot of room for, I guess, what community is. And so you can see some bullet points there. And then we also have this useful diagram. Uh, so this comes from the Surgeon General, and this highlights three major components of social connection. So you have structure, which is talking about how many connections you have and how often you interact. And then you have function, which is talking about what those connections do for you. They could be like emotional support, practical help, somebody who checks in on you, um, things like that. And then quality, that means whether those interactions are healthy and supportive, stressful or strained, or excluding or inclusive. And so moving on, we're going to talk about why this is important, for people's health, well-being, and happiness. And so from a mental health context, community is important because it, provides belonging. And, a lot of these points are pretty basic and simple. People do better mentally when they have consistent supportive connection. And that doesn't really mean you need like a big social circle. It just means you need to have regular contact with people where the support is real and you feel included. Um, One reason community matters is that it changes how stress lands. Stress is not only about what happens, it's about whether you have support while it's happening. And when people have those supportive relationships or support structures, as we say, they tend to cope better. And so they solve problems earlier and they don't carry them alone for as long. And therefore, they're more likely to stay connected to their regular routines and coping skills that keep them stable. And then on the other side of that, social isolation and loneliness are associated with worse mental health outcomes. And so the CDC describes links between isolation and loneliness in conditions like depression and anxiety. It also links with substance use problems and self-harm risks. Um, that does not mean loneliness causes every mental health problem, but it does mean that when, connections drop, risk does tend to go up and coping tends to get harder. There's also a practical component here. Community supports protective behaviors. And so when you have people around you, someone notices changes, they ask questions, they check in on you, and then they can encourage you to get help sooner instead of later. And so even light connections can matter, like somebody that you see at the gym that kind of encourages you, or somebody you volunteer with that you see maybe once a week. And now we're going to kind of shift from, well, I got this diagram here first, and this just kind of gives an example of how the impact or the importance of community is shown through a mental health context. And you can see that when you have stress and life demands, some examples of those are like a job search, moving, trying to fill out your benefits paperwork, having family stress. Uh, you can move into social connection where you can find support and belonging. And some examples of that can be weekly groups that, you go get dinner once a week. For example, I have a friend group where we go to Taco Tuesday once a week and we all kind of see each other and check in then. Or maybe just one-on-one check-ins where you have a mentor or a coach that you talk to. And then when you have that community and it supports those coping behaviors, some of those things can look like talking it out, engaging in those regular routines with people, asking for that early help, and just making generally healthier choices if you have better examples in that community. And then with those mental health outcomes that are supported, you have less isolation, better mood, better sleep, and lower risk for a mental health spiral. And now shifting into the physical health component. A lot of people think community is mostly about mood, but the public health view is more broad. So social isolation and loneliness are linked with higher risk for multiple health problems as well. And so the CDC and the Surgeon General frame it as like a real health issue and not just a social preference. And so there's evidence that social connection is linked with better health over time, including lower risk of early death. And the World Health Organization describes social connection as being linked with reduced risk of early death. Um, and so relationships don't solve everything, but they are a component of how humans stay healthy. And some examples of how that impacts the body. Stress physiology. So when people feel isolated, the body can stay in a more activated stress state for longer. That can affect sleep quality, inflammation, cardiovascular strain, and all that can compound over time. Another pathway is the connection that influences how safe and regulated people feel day to day, which shapes their recovery, energy levels, and overall resilience. Then there's practical behavior pathways. So when people are connected, they stay active and they follow through with their care, as we've mentioned. People remind you about appointments. They know when you're slipping. They show concern. Or if you've pulled back from a routine, like you stop showing up to the gym or you miss a doctor's appointment. Maybe you don't show up to church for a couple weeks in a row and people notice. Uh, so when you're isolated, the opposite tends to happen. You know, those routines fall apart. Nobody checks in on you. Small problems can escalate and kind of get out of control if you delay addressing them. And that can impact your long-term health behaviors. So this diagram shows how the social connection can kind of influence physical health. And you can see how it's all sort of connected there, how behaviors and biology, psychology, all is influenced by social connection and then contributes to the health outcomes. And so some of the examples there are things like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and those things have a higher possibility of developing with people that have poor social connections, and then that's going to lead to a potential, premature mortality or increased risk of premature mortality. So even though those things seem simple and people don't think about them a lot, they have a big impact on you. And then your overall well-being. So well-being includes mood, but it also includes stability and feeling like you matter to other people. And so a lot of transition frustration comes from losing that sense of being a part of something. And one of the more important things community provides is structure in your daily life. It gives you places you're expected, roles you can step into, and reasons to show up. That supports purpose and identity over time. And when people have a place where they contribute, even in small ways, it tends to improve their sense of direction. When connection drops, life also gets smaller and people do fewer activities. They have fewer reasons to leave the house and their routine becomes less stable. That makes it easier for people to have motivation drop out and for unhealthy patterns to build. This is a big reason why community is not like just an add-on to people's life. It's something that shapes their daily life. And this is also why major health organizations are starting to treat social connection as a public health issue. Because, as we're talking about, you see these broad effects across mental health, physical health, and then just overall well-being. Um, so if it has the power to kind of change baseline and support stability, purpose, and healthier routines, then that's something that we need to kind of start shifting to focus on. This is a diagram that kind of shows how different components of well-being are all connected to a sense of belonging here. And so some examples of meaning or having a purpose or a mission, like when you're active duty, and that's something that everybody sort of has assigned to them, so to speak. And then you also have those shared values. That's something that you definitely lose when you get out. And so you need to focus on building as you transition. And some examples of routine, as we talked about, are those like regular meetups to replace things like that rigid structure that people are used to having in the military. We have your daily, PT, you have your, weekly or monthly meetings that you do, a very predictable schedule. And so without people having that, like I said, sort of assigned to them, it's easy for them to fall out of it and not build it into their own life as a civilian. And it's the same thing with their contribution and that feeling of kind of accomplishment, like they're contributing to something and having that responsibility and role. That's another thing that in the military is sort of just assigned to you, and not everybody can pick that up when they get out. So a lot of people do struggle with finding ways to build that purpose and feel like they are contributing to something greater than themselves. And so, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but community in the military. Uh, it's not something you like really build from scratch. It's completely integrated into your daily life. You guys train together, you work together, you rely on each other to meet standards and complete missions. Repeated contact and shared responsibility build trust and cohesion over time. And the amount of time that, you spend together in the military, you kind of build that much quicker than in a lot of civilian environments. Um, So, like I said, in service, a lot of those levels are supported automatically of community. And we can see these different factors here that shape social connection, which, like I said, kind of defining community, it's those connections that we make. And again, this comes from the Surgeon General, who is a majority of the source of my information. Um, so you can see the different levels of social connection that they have listed here. And at the relationship level, you get frequent contact and shared routines, and you're around the same people consistently. And then there's also a clear expectation for teamwork and accountability that creates conditions for connection to form, even if you're not someone who is naturally social. At the community level, there are built-in systems that support connection. You have a workplace community, access to organized activities, shared spaces, and group structures. You also have predictable routines that keep people moving through the same places at the same times. Like I said, you have like morning PT, chow at the same time. Everybody goes to the DFAC together. Yeah, things like that. At the society level, the military has a shared culture, norms, and values. There's a common language, a sense of what matters, and clear standards. That shared culture makes it easier to feel understood and feel like you belong, going back to that sense of belonging. And because the environment is aligned around similar expectations, that's easier to feel that way, again, compared to civilian environments, a lot of civilian environments. And then even at the individual level, people's needs vary, but the military structure still reduces some barriers to that connection because it provides routine contact and built-in, roles for people where they have to interact with each other. So even if you're introverted or dealing with stress or going through something really hard, the system still puts you in that group structure where you are forced to interact with each other. Um, And so when someone transitions out, the loss is bigger than it looks on paper. It's not just leaving a job, but it's losing a whole set of relationship routines, community structures, and a shared culture that used to support connection every day. And now using that same structure to connect it to what happens after transition, at the relationship level, that contact, it drops fast. You no longer have that daily proximity to the same people. You lose the automatic rhythm of seeing people at work, in training, in shared spaces, and during routine activities. Connection becomes optional in civilian life, and many people are already busy with their own routines. At the community level, your environment changes frequently. Many service members move, and even if you stay in the same place, your daily life kind of changes and how you navigate changes. You have a new workplace, new schedule, new commute, new or less built-in gathering points, new ones that you have to find because you don't have access to the same ones necessarily. And this matters because community connection is about not just motivation, but it's about access. And so things like transportation, cost, public spaces that are accessible and safe for people to enter. Um, and available organizations that can make community easier to access for people or harder, depending on how exclusive they are. And then at the society level, the cultural shift can be really hard. The military has a shared identity and shared norms. In civilian life, the culture is more mixed, and a lot of veterans report feeling misunderstood or feeling like they have to explain themselves or feeling out of place. This is one reason why identity shift is a really big part of transition. It's not only about employment, it's about change in how you see yourself and how you fit in the world around you. And at the individual level, you could be dealing with stressors that make connection harder, like a job search, benefits, connections, finances, family stress, health issues, sleep problems, mental fatigue, all kinds of stuff. And so those individual factors can make it hard to reach out, even when you want connection. And when these levels shift all at once, it can feel like a sudden drop in community. And that feeling is not random. It's like a predictable outcome of losing a system that used to supply that connection. And it supplied it through structure, routine, and shared culture. And so that's why it's really common to hear veterans describe transition as feeling isolated, even when they're functioning on the surface. The external structure changed and the social system changed with it. And so now moving into kind of what that's community structure can look like in civilian life. So there's a lot of common forms of communities that people build. And so you have like sport and fitness communities, things like that. You also have faith, spirituality, values-based communities. You have hobbies and interest groups. You have volunteerism and service. You have work and school cohorts. And then you have like lived experience groups, such as veteran groups, recovery groups, peer support, things like that. And so I saw this community asset map, and I thought it was a pretty cool resource. It doesn't necessarily apply directly to our community. It's obviously based on a different community, but it's a pretty good like idea, a good format to use for mapping out your local community and what kind of assets and institutions and spaces are available to you in order to help build community. Um, so it kind of helps because instead of starting with what a community lacks, it builds on what a community already has in terms of people, groups, places, and resources that create connection. Um, it looks at individuals, people with skills, knowledge, and lived experience that are willing to show up in civilian life. It looks at associations, so things like clubs, teams, and volunteer groups, faith groups, hobby groups, informal organizations. And that's where a lot of civilian community happens because these groups create regular contact around shared interest and shared values. And so things like sports leagues, gyms, outdoor groups, religious communities, hobby meetups. Like personally, I love tabletop gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, stuff like that. Um, Service organizations, those all kind of fit in that category of associations. Then you have institutions, and so those are more formal. They're things like schools and workplaces, clinics, communities, organizations such as government services. Um, and so institutions matter because they have built-in structure, schedules, and resources, and they also have places where people naturally gather over time. There's also physical spaces, and this includes parks, trails, community centers, coffee shops, gyms, gardens, and other public spaces where people can become regulars. And in many places, physical spaces are the on-ramp, so to speak, to community because they're low pressure and low barrier to entry. They're easily repeatable. And then there's the local economy. And so businesses and local partners that support community activities, sometimes by hosting events, sponsoring groups, offering space, or just simply becoming a place where people are able to see each other regularly. Um, this specific example is built around like a community garden project, like I was saying, but the structure applies to any community goal. And You could just plug and play the names of institutions, physical spaces, and things like that that support connection in your community. You just have to do a little bit of research to build that map. And it's easy to see how just like one project can become a hub that links all kinds of parts of community. And this translates to civilian life after transition, because, like I said, it gives you a practical way to see community as a system that you can easily plug into. And especially if you're in a new place or you feel disconnected, it helps you learn about that new place and become more connected with it. Also helps you find like the most realistic entry points to the community. And so for a lot of veterans, the most effective starting points tend to be activity-based and purpose-based. So things like fitness groups, outdoor groups, volunteer service, faith or values-based communities, and lived experience groups like veteran peer communities. So these different categories kind of help you see options beyond just one lane. And community and civilian life often work through these hubs, shared activities and shared purpose, shared place, and repeated contact over time. So moving into like more practical strategies of how to build community. And it's pretty simple. And again, the Surgeon General has a pretty sweet diagram to help us. And so the graphic here, it lays out 6 pillars to advance social connection at a community level, but also works as like a personal checklist if you want it to. And so if you're trying to build community after transition, these pillars point to the same basic idea. Connection is easier when the environment supports it and when the relationships you're in are healthy. And so, yeah, I kind of translated this into personal terms. And so you have strengthening social infrastructure. Yeah, so on an individual level, this means choosing places where connection can actually happen. And the way to do that is to pick 1 or 2 spaces that meet regularly and then just show up consistently. I know, I told you it's going to sound really simple. And so things like a gym class, a sports league, faith community, a volunteer shift at an organization that you're interested in, some kind of hobby group, some kind of recurring community event. And so repetition matters more than intensity. Like just showing up on a consistent basis is more important than showing up and being the all-star like one time. Um, and if you show up one place every week, it usually builds more connection than showing like 5 places you visit one time. And then next is the pro connection conditions. So that's basically barriers and access. You want to look at and choose options that are realistically fit for your life. That's going to think about things like location, transportation, time, cost, difficulty to access, like if it's hard to get to these locations. If it conflicts with your schedule, like if you work during that time or if it's across town right after you get work. So when you have those things, it's going to make it harder to access those activities in that community, and that's going to kind of kill your motivation a little bit and make it a little discouraging. And so you want to try and take those things into account as you, so to speak, strategically approach building community. And then you have an interesting one, which is sort of like mobilizing the health sector. And so again, I'm adapting it from the 6 pillars that we have here. And for personal community building, this means using healthcare when you need it. So if you're feeling isolated and struggling with your mood or just stuck, it's reasonable to ask a provider about groups, psychoeducation, um, peer support, local community resources, things like that. And so it's not only for crisis, but it's a practical pathway to connection. Um, and then looking at digital environments, the point here, it's not that digital is bad. Digital just works best when it supports real routines. And use digital tools to find groups, confirm time and place, and keep tight contact. But most people need some in-person repetition to build that deeper connection. With deepening knowledge, at a personal level, that means paying attention to what actually works for you. And so which spaces leave you feeling more grounded? Which ones feel draining? Which ones have a structure that makes it easy to return to? and which ones lead to actual relationships over time. This is basically learning your own pattern and adjusting. And then number six, we have culture of connection. So this is basically like the quality piece, and you want to build your community in places that are respectful and welcoming. You also want to be a person who contributes to that culture. So you show up and follow through, be reliable, be friendly, keep boundaries clear, and make it easy for people to interact with you. So if I were to connect this to my own experience, what worked for me was choosing settings where there was meaning, things I believed in, there was repetition and a clear role. So Gold Star Peak Foundation, it's a nonprofit organization that does like some hiking with Gold Star families. And that gave meaning to me, gave me a mission, but it also combined it with an interest of mine. I really enjoy hiking. And then having the events be scheduled regularly through the summer created a routine. And me having a role in the organization made me feel like I was contributing to something, to the mission. And then on top of that, it was a really great networking piece. I was able to build really wonderful relationships out of that. And years later, it continues to be a really great part of my life. And so, if you're going to take one thing from this slide, it's that community building is often less about forcing yourself to be social and more about choosing the right structure and showing up long enough for connection to form. And so, I'm going to move into examples from Alaska, kind of expand on Gold Star Peak. That's really my example from Alaska. But there's not a lot to this slide. I'm just going to more talk about it. And so community building in Alaska, Alaska is a useful context because it makes the barriers more obvious. There's a lot of real distance, isolation. You have barriers like weather actually being something that impacts you. So travel time is real. And then there's fewer places like other places to be in terms of the population. Like there's the Anchorage area and the valley, and then that's the majority of Alaska's population. So like everybody's kind of here. Um, so community is a little bit different here, and it makes for an interesting example. And one thing that the Surgeon General emphasizes is that connection is shaped by the environment and not just individual effort. And so in Alaska, that's pretty big. It shows up pretty quickly. Um, so if there's fewer accessible gathering places and if routine is harder because of weather or distance, then the community you build tends to come from organized recurring activities more than just like spontaneous social life. So it's about getting kind of involved with those different communities, those different organizations, those different things that you have those shared values with. And again, touching on that Gold Star Peak example for me, um, like I said, that had meaning, repetition, and contribution. And that's something that really mattered to me. And I also started to realize that I think no matter what you're doing, you're going to be sort of volunteering your time, so to speak. You're going to have to invest time and effort in order to build community. It's not something that's just going to be like you can go buy it at the store and it takes like 5 minutes. Um, like I'm saying, it's a lot of repetition that you have to show up and be consistent with, but it has a lot of payoff because you do find a lot of value and connection. Um, and you know, to expand on that example of how it builds community, that is also sort of how I came to meet Brandy and become connected with the Cohen Clinic. And so not only did it open doors for me socially and did I make new friends and find kind of this sort of meaning, it opened doors for me professionally and, you know, it helped expand the quality of my education. And so getting out there and building community and networking and being consistent and sort of reflecting and finding what your values are and what organizations are out there that support those values is all really important to your success and happiness after transition. Um, and so the takeaway from the Alaska example, not everybody needs the same kind of group. Not everybody needs to join a hiking group or go sign up at Gold Star Peak. Um, the takeaway is that even when, the environment changes how the connection is made, it becomes even more important to choose settings that have a clear purpose and offer ways for you to contribute. And that combination makes community more likely to form and more likely to last. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Awesome job, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing kind of your personal journey through all of that and how it kind of impacts transitioning, and it's something that we see a lot. And I know you've mentioned it a lot of times, is finding that purpose, finding that program or that group or that activity, something that gives that purpose, that also gives that structure and that scheduling and that feeling of needing to be somewhere or needing to be needed or have something to give yourself to, has been really, really important. And that's, like I said, something that we see in here every single day. We love having Nick here. We're so grateful that he's here. And shameless plug, if this is something that you know of that you might be getting ready to kind of go through or have recently gone through the transition, or if you know someone that might be in the very near future, Nick is going to be, along with me, kind of working with him. Nick's going to be hosting a group where we're using cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of take some of these concepts and bring them together in a therapeutic workroom, and not only build some skills but have some of that peer support wrapped in together, but also just kind of put it all out there, talk about it, give some skills so that way they're prepared for it on lots of different kind of avenues. So if you or someone would be appropriate for that group, by all means give us a call. We would love to make sure that there's space for you or someone for that if you need it. But if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or I can, set it up to where you're able to unmute. Otherwise, you all have a lovely day. I hope this Monday is kicking off your week in a very positive way. So let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you or any questions we can do to answer. Looks like most people are jumping off, except for a couple. So we'll give it another minute or two, and then we'll go ahead and close up the meeting. You all have my email if you need to reach out. Happy to help. All right, Nick. Well, thanks for being here today. I appreciate you. I know it's your off day, so thanks for doing it anyway. And I will see you soon. Bye.
Thanks for the plug. See ya.